Hello YouTube, this is Morgan Airspeed Prime here with my next Sword Art Online Alicization anime review. This one's going to be for episode 3, which is called The End Mountains. And again, I think the main thing to talk about here is that the pacing continues to, I think, be very good in terms of getting the story across. I don't think they're covering ground too much or too slowly. So I'm very pleased with how it's going. Definitely, like the tease at the end of this episode of like the first big, I suppose, action of the arc in a way about to happen is really cool. But also just the setup of a lot of the character stuff that's happening here, and just I suppose in the background the fact that we still haven't cut back to the real world to find out, I suppose, why all of this is happening. I'm wondering when they're going to do that. But we're focusing on, okay, Kirito is around somehow, doesn't know the details about what happened before, but is just going along with the fact that he's in the game and he has to progress. And we know that he, even though they're obviously not real people, he still is going to treat them that way because that's how Kirito views virtual worlds. And I think this episode did a good job of just getting across that idea that they are artificial fluctlights, and how at times Kirito is kind of confused by the fact that they seem, in a lot of ways, unable to make any sort of a notable choice. They seem sort of locked into their roles and they can't make any decisions. But then he'll be surprised when a character does something, in that he brings up the idea of, like, how was Alice even able to break one of these rules if they're so set in stone that, like, people freeze up before they can do anything? Even little things like Yu-Gi-Oh explains where he got the sword from, which obviously we saw in like the first episode, but just to know that even with Kirito not around, he actually went and got the sword and brought it back. That Yu-Gi-Oh, who's kind of up until this episode, I think, been presented as being this very kind of I'm going to say boring, but I don't really mean it in that way. I still like the character. I think just he is so much the kind of almost classic NPC character. He's nice and all, but he's not done anything that would demonstrate that he's kind of breaking the rules or anything like that. So the fact that he would take time out of his like schedule to attempt to bring that sword closer and closer back with him for some reason, and it's obviously because there's an emotional connection there, because the journey to the End Mountains is where Alice is basically what led to Alice being taken, and this sword, obviously, there's a meaning to him. Similarly, what they did with Selka towards the end of the episode, of her finding out finally from Kirito what rule Alice actually broke, that she went up the End Mountains and touched the other side, basically. That's what she did wrong. And Selka, now knowing this, decides to go up there to, I suppose, investigate, potentially see if she's up there or something like that. And again, a character who otherwise is very regimented, like you have to wake up at this time, is suddenly like abandoning all of her stuff, waking up early to rush off to the mountains. And it's getting across this idea that these characters are growing, that I suppose there has to be a sort of like outside influence that causes these things to happen. But once there is a sense of, I suppose, an actual person having an influence on these AI, they really develop into people who are able to kind of have their own choices for the most part. Now, of course, this will be developed, the whole idea of what's going on here, as the arc progresses. But I think I like that the slow pacing here works because they're gradually presenting all of these ideas. Like, let's not forget that when Yu-Gi-Oh says, like, I couldn't move, that's not just the classic I couldn't move because I was scared thing of the hesitation in a way before becoming a hero that you see in a lot of things. They literally showed system error comes up on his eye, and they're saying that he could have moved, wanted to move, something stopped him, like physically stopped him from being able to do that. And then plus with how Kirito, basically, to do anything outside of the normal, basically has to say, but it's not a rule, here's a workaround. That's all, to me, very interesting. And plus just some of the other stuff, like before Yu-Gi-Oh shows Kirito the sword, they have a talk which reveals that Alice was studying the sacred arts, plus also, I suppose, getting that idea across. They mentioned that there's a high-end ability that can basically stop life from decreasing, which basically presents the idea of like kind of agelessness or kind of immortality within the world, in that if you actually have that ability, that is incredible, and that it basically means you can keep yourself from dying. Obviously they specify only high level people can use it, but they said that for a reason. They specified that spell basically for a reason. Then I suppose later on in the episode you had the scene with Kirito and Yu-Gi-Oh, where Yu-Gi-Oh actually does the generate luminous element thing, and this is Kirito, I suppose, learning about this for the first time here, and he obviously knows what those words mean, but to Yu-Gi-Oh and everyone else who does them, the generate luminous element is basically just magical words that don't mean anything. But to Kirito, he's aware that that is very clearly kind of computer, like game design type speak of like, that's more or less how you would in coding almost generate that sort of stuff within whatever game engine you're using, of just like specify it in that way, generate luminous element, and then specify a specific type. So that's really cool that like in a fantasy world like this, that there are all of these things like status windows that are just part of the world, that like the inhabitants of this world just have their own reasoning behind why it's like that, and there's no, because they don't know like what computers are or what games are, like it just is perfectly normal to them. But Kirito, as the outsider, is aware of like, okay, so I sort of have Kirito basically has an advantage in a way with the sacred arts if he wants to use them, because he actually gets what they actually mean. So that's pretty interesting. Beyond that, I suppose you had the sort of emotional moment of Selka and Kirito talking, and I suppose yes, you get the reveal with Selka that she is Alice's younger sister, and in a way has kind of just been put in the position of almost like replacing Alice in the village, and that immediately Selka just kind of filled in Alice's role, wasn't told anything about the specifics of what happened to Alice. And then I suppose most notably in terms of like character development, specifying that Yu-Gi-Oh and I suppose Selka used to kind of get on pretty well, and that Yu-Gi-Oh used to smile a lot, but then whenever he sees Selka, it's like Selka just reminds him of Alice and it makes him sad. I think that's a really interesting dynamic, that for Yu-Gi-Oh, just his response to what happened to Alice is that he basically lost two people because of obviously losing Alice, and then how he's kind of after that sort of treated kind of Selka because of that. So especially with the idea that they basically established that Selka has a crush on Yu-Gi-Oh, I think that's a pretty interesting dynamic to bring up, and how Kirito, his arrival here at this point in time, is really changing things immediately, in that just the idea that Yu-Gi-Oh now in a way kind of almost believes that they could actually take down the tree, they could do all of this stuff, they can be the ones to get Selka back, when before the only really notable thing that you could say Yu-Gi-Oh did was hauling the sword down over the course of 3 months from the mountain, and now suddenly he's getting all this influence from Kirito, who we know is always the person who's like who's got the kind of clever ideas, that does things in no way by the kind of rules. So he is, I suppose, almost this like accelerator for Yu-Gi-Oh in terms of really altering him from just being a artificial fluctlight locked into the system to suddenly now being able to make more choices on his own with his own agency. So I think that's very clearly what they're setting up kind of behind the scenes of all of this. So I really liked the episode, the tease at the end of like a fight with the goblins about to happen, and the fact that Yu-Gi-Oh seems to be sort of like frozen once again. And I don't know, are they going down the road of like literally this is fear of potentially being hurt or killed by these goblins, or is this the system error thing happening of like he wants to go and fight them but like he actually can't because of some rule? So Kirito is of course going to be called into action here. I assume the idea is that like the goblins have weapons, they'll get weapons from there, and will have some sort of a fight, because they basically set up the idea that, oh, they can cut down the tree quicker if they use the blue rose sword. The problem is that Kirito and Yu-Gi-Oh can barely lift it. Kirito is like skilled enough that he can just about force like a really good swing out of it, but he can't be accurate with it. And they basically say it's because each object has a specific class, and then each item has like a sort of class authority kind of level on it. And Kirito basically says, I'm not of a high enough authority level to be able to properly wield this sword. And this is where they're getting into, I suppose, the level up mechanics of the game and what it actually does. And they'll explore this a little bit more in terms of why the world is the way it is. But the first real hint of that Kirito needs to level up to be able to use this sword. If they can use the sword, they can cut down the tree much quicker than before. And Kirito wants to go to the central city, and he knows that he's going to need Yu-Gi-Oh to do that, and to do that he needs to get Yu-Gi-Oh out of his calling, which involves cutting down the tree. So, it's all coming together, and this is going to be a very kind of, I suppose, notable moment here, how Yu-Gi-Oh reacts to this fight, because when Yu-Gi-Oh swings the sword at the tree, there's this like hint that like Kirito knows this sort of stuff, and he sees some potential in the way Yu-Gi-Oh swings that sword. So he's going to give him some swordsmanship tips, and very clearly they're setting up that they're both going to be very skilled, and this is going to be like Yu-Gi-Oh's true calling, the two swordsmen basically. So some very fun setup here. I really enjoyed the episode. Not the most eventful, but a lot of just the conversation type stuff I thought was very interesting. I don't feel like the episode really wasted a lot of time or anything. Just, the little bit of a frustration at the end of just ending it on the kind of cliffhanger of the fight is just about to happen, and now we need to wait a week for that to actually happen. But it's going to be really cool next week. The episode is titled Departure, so I think we pretty much know what that means if you've watched the opening for the show, Kirito and Yu-Gi-Oh traveling. So that's going to be fun. But that's been my thoughts on this week's episode. In the comments, let me know your thoughts were on the episode. But yeah, that's been the video. Thanks for watching, and bye.